Coming up next, the Bookening reads Hamlet. Podcast or not to podcast? That is the question, folks, and we decided to podcast today because we are not melancholy Danes. We are decisive Americans. My name is Nathan. I'm your humble and obedient and decisively American host. Oh, and look at that. Walking in late, we've got Jake.
Wait, Nathan.
What?
Do you see that figure that just wandered into the room?
But soft.
Is it just my eyes, or do you see it too?
There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Brandon.
So I've
and those things are named Jake Menzel.
Yeah. He's right there.
That's right.
He's joined us on the golden ticket to quality infotainment.
He is more than can be dreamt of in philosophy.
Right.
Indeed.
He's fartles that we bear.
A good old fartles.
Yeah. You know, we all deal with them. The old fartles. What's a fartle?
You would ask that question.
Oh, Brandon, you don't know?
It's a
Zero
it's a burden.
stars.
0 stars.
It's just a burden. It's something heavy that you carry.
Who would fartles bear when he himself might a quietus make with a bear bodkin? Oh, man. We're going to be talking about making quietuses with bear bodkins, folks. We're going to be talking about fartles. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things because this is the first official, non-prelude Hamlet podcast as done by your friends at the Bookening. We are, of course, the golden ticket to quality infotainment. Now, Jake, you actually crept ghost-like into this podcast before I could introduce the other fella. So would you like to bring him on stage so he can strut and fret and do all that stagey stuff?
He's but a player on this stage. On our stage.
On our poor stage.
Yep. All the world is but a stage. He's Brandon Chastain. He is the scholar who's a baller of books.
Mm-hmm.
That I am.
That you are.
I suppose.
Oh, Brandon.
And he dreams about things in his philosophies. That's what he does.
Do you dream about things in your philosophies, Brandon?
I do. But Jake is beyond those things.
Well, Jake's got a lot of fartles.
Yeah. Those things are hard to carry.
Yeah.
I guess it's nice to know that I'm not dreaming about Jake.
Yeah, no.
You're not capable of it.
Yeah, you don't want to dream about a guy with a bunch of fartles.
Yeah. Sounds like a personal issue.
Yeah. Well, folks, what other famous lines from Hamlet? How many famous lines from Hamlet can we name off the top of our head? That's fun.
Well,
alas, poor Yorick.
I wonder who could get the. I wonder who could get the farthest and be or not to be.
Oh man, my brain is not working all that well tonight, guys.
Oh, you're just making that excuse. I bet your brain's working great. You don't have any fartles. Brandon, we often have referred to Brandon as old fartleless Brandon.
That is usually what I get called. Oh, fartleless.
Farterless Brandon.
Yeah.
To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or to take arms against a sea and by opposing end them.
A sea of troubles and by opposing in
them. To die, to sleep, no more.
No, to sleep perchance to dream.
To sleep perchance to dream. No, there's no more in there, isn't there?
Yeah, but it's later.
To die, to sleep
no
perchance
more. To dream.
No,
you're skipping.
Yeah.
I'm skipping or he's skipping?
Sleep. You're skipping, Jake. It's
to die, to sleep no more. And by a sleep to say, yeah. There's
we end the heartache.
The 1,000 natural heartaches that flesh is heir to.
1,000 natural shocks that flesh,
The flesh is heir to.
Shocks that flesh is heir to.
And then he says, to die.
'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished.
Yes, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished.
To die, to sleep, perchance to dream.
There you go.
There's the rub.
Sleep of death, what dreams
may come when we have shuffled off this
mortal coil.
It's a little known fact that he's actually smoking a brisket in this scene because he misplaces the rub for his barbecue and he finds it at that point. There's the rub. So,
man, quality
barbecue
podcasting
humor
right there. Yeah, barbecue humor. There's just not enough of it in this podcast.
Shuffle off this mortal coil. That's in there somewhere.
Yeah, no, we got about that far between the three of us. What dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil. There's the something that makes something of something.
Yeah.
There's the conjecture. There's
must give us pause. There's something that makes calamity of so long life.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
we've got to bear the whips and scorns of time at some point, and the proud man's contumely.
Who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of unrequited love, and a bunch of other crap that we
a whole big list of things, and something about a bear bodkin.
And then he says, and who would Fardels bear when he himself his quietest might make with a bear bodkin?
Are you sure that the bear bodkin doesn't come before the Fardels?
I think the bear bodkin comes after the Fardels.
I think the bear bodkin comes before the Fardels.
He's got the bear bodkin in his hand. He's got the bear bodkin in
I know that no
hand.
traveler returns the undiscovered country from whose born no traveler returns.
Oh, yeah, we forgot all about that. Does that come before bear bodkin?
I think after.
That becomes
in conscience doth make cowards of us all. That's a good line that's in there.
Thus does conscience make cowards of us all, and enterprises of great pith and marrow go awry and lose the name of action. But soft Faraphilia comes through yonder window, or something like that. No, Faraphilia doesn't come through yonder window.
All right, I'm looking it up. We'll see how we did.
Yeah. He's got a bear bodkin.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
To be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing in them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity. So we got that far. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietest make with a bear bodkin. Who would Fardels bear? So I was right. Bear bodkin comes before Fardels.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Who would Fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will.
And
it makes us bear those ills we have, then fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied over with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
Pretty great. All right, now, because I am nothing if not someone who is in it for the quality infotainment, I am going to read the No Fear Shakespeare version of this. You guys ready for this?
Oh, wow.
The question is it better to be alive or dead?
That is the question.
So far, we've got a sophomore in high school analyzing the speech.
Yeah, or a professor giving their assignment. The question is it better to be alive or dead? Is it nobler to put up with all the nasty things that luck throws your way, or to fight against all those troubles by simply putting an end to them once and for all?
By committing suicide.
Yeah. Dying, sleeping. That's all dying is, a sleep that ends all the heartache and shocks that life on earth gives us. That's an achievement to wish for. To die, to sleep, maybe to dream. Ah, but there's the catch. In death's sleep, who knows what kind of dreams might come after we put the noise and motion of life behind us. That's certainly something to worry about.
Sure is.
That's the consideration that makes us stretch out our sufferings so long. After all, who would put up with all life's humiliation? The abuse from superiors, the insult of arrogant men, the pangs of unrequited love, the inefficiency of the legal system, the rudeness of people in office, the mistreatment of good people that you have to take from bad people, when you could simply take out your knife and call it quits. Who would choose to grunt and sweat through an exhausting life unless they were afraid of something dreadful after death, the undiscovered country from which no visitor returns, which we wonder about without getting any answers from, and which makes us stick to the evils we know rather than rush off to seek the ones we don't. Fear of death makes us all cowards, and our natural boldness becomes weak with too much thinking. Actions that should be carried out at once get misdirected and stop being actions at all. But shh! Here comes the beautiful Ophelia. Pretty lady, please remember me when you pray.
Pretty lady.
Pretty lady.
Get thee to a nunnery.
Hey, lady.
Oh, lady. Here you guys go. Here's another one.
It's a sound paraphrase, but
It turns out the poetry really adds something to Shakespeare. I don't know how you guys
To
feel
be
about it.
or not to be, that is the bare bodkin that makes calamity of so long life. For who would fardels bear till Burnham would
King
to
and the
come
Duke.
to Dunsinane? But that the fear of something after death murders the innocent sleep. Great nature's second course. It makes us rather sling the arrows of outrageous fortune than fly to others that we know not of. Oh, wow. That's good stuff.
You know what? That just makes me so sad because Mark Twain could rely on his audience being literate enough
to know.
to think that was funny.
Yep.
Like, oh yeah, of course everybody knows these quotes, and not everybody's an expert, but we all kind of know our Shakespeare famous quotes.
Not
And so
everybody.
I
Not
can mix them
anymore.
all up. Well, that's my point, Brandon. That's my point.
We're a bunch of illiterates.
That is my point.
That's the bare bodkin.
That's the bare bodkin that makes quietest of us all.
I guess you kill yourself with a sewing needle? Is that what he means?
A bare bodkin?
Isn't that what that means?
Isn't a bare bodkin just a knife?
I think that it has various meanings. Let's look it up. A blunt, thick needle.
There used to be
But let's
Yep.
see bodkin in
a
Hamlet.
graying tower alone on the sea. You
An unsheathed dagger.
An unsheathed dagger is what it means there, yeah.
the light on the dark side of me.
Which makes sense why they would both share the same name.
Baby, I compare you to a kiss from a rose on the grave. So it is a needle? I wasn't paying any attention.
It
Yeah, I
can
know.
be.
You're singing Seal. Great.
Shakespeare reminds me of Seal sometimes. The two great artists of their respective periods. I don't know if Seal's even an artist. It's probably just the name of the band. But, okay. Well, folks, this is the Bookening. Hey, how many other famous lines from Hamlet can we name? I'm not going to. So there's to be or not to be soliloquy. There's the last poor Yorick. There is... let's just keep
Brevity is
going
the
into
soul of wit.
Frailty, thy name is woman.
Frailty, thy name is Brandon. I meant to cue that up.
Yeah. Well, you got a lot of Hamlet podcasts ahead of you to...
Something is rotten in the state of Denmark.
Yep.
To thine own, this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not be false to any man.
Yep.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be.
Is that from Polonius' speech?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. What a piece of work is man?
Mm.
What a piece of work is man?
Methinks the lady doth protest too much, methinks.
Mm-hmm.
Methinks.
Doubt thou the stars are fire. Doubt thou the sun doth move, but never doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt my love. I botched that, but that's in there.
I like your addition. Get to thee to a nunnery. We already said there's more in heaven and earth Horatio than is contained in your philosophy. What are we missing, Brandon? Did we say all the money quotes?
I think you
Though this be madness, there is method in it.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Good night, sweet prince.
That's another great one. I always, man.
A lot of great lines.
Every time I watch,
Now cracks a noble heart.
the Hamlet does have some great lines in it. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, I think Hamlet has some good lines in it.
That limb is reinforced with steel.
Yeah. I'm just going to go out on a steel limb. I won't be making my quietus by falling from this steel limb.
Landing on a bear bodkin.
And landing on a bear bodkin. He's got a bear bodkin.
But you do have the fartles.
Yeah. You got fartles?
You do.
I don't have any fartles. You and me are fartleless. Jake's the one
Jake
with all
that
the
has
fartles.
the fartles.
Yeah, no, Jake is like Mr. Fartle.
He's the father of fartles.
He's the farting
the fartling father.
The fartling father. No,
this is great. I am
good
so
podcasting
glad.
right here.
Hey, I like this podcast so far. And speaking of great podcasting, I'll tell you what goes into great podcasting. Having a contextual Texan give context for Hamlet.
Yeah, so
There's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Hey, that's another one.
that is a very true statement. So this is one of Shakespeare's tragedies.
Yeah. Brandon, by
And
the way,
it's
is the contextual Texan. He's from Texas. He provides a bunch of needed context on our work. And he is going to provide some context on Hamlet as he already began to do.
It's a nihilistic work in some people's opinions.
Boo.
Yeah. It is deeply introspective, and it is about depression and pride and all these things. But the deep isolation and the feeling of the monotony and repetitiousness of life and the meaninglessness of life. And we get to feel that almost every year when we once again, for now the 6th time, do a context on Shakespeare.
You got jokes,
Brandon, the
my
play's
friend.
the thing.
Yeah, the play's the thing, man.
Yeah. The show must go on.
Yep.
Play's the thing.
Well, then let's do this.
Yeah, let's do this.
So we've talked a lot about Shakespeare. People can go back and listen to
Brandon, everybody expects you to say something completely original and new and to not repeat a single thing.
You
Well, I
are
do-
the Shakespeare of context, my friend.
I do have some things to share today, guys, and
Okay.
that's wonderful. So usually the way we go about this is we talk about when he was born and when he died.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about some of the cultural context surrounding him. We talk a lot about our theories on the way that he viewed craft and writing and the nature of genius.
This is true.
So there you go. There's context for you.
That's usually what we would be doing right now.
But this is a big one, guys. Not just because of Shakespeare, but because this is his most popular play, and I think his most significant as far as the influence it's had. Just of all the various resources I was looking into and interviews I was listening to and stuff like that. This play has been adapted for film, I think, more than just
At least once.
At least once. I think
In The
more
Lion King.
in The Lion King, yes. More than any other story except for Cinderella, I think I read one place.
Wow.
And so this was his story that resonated the most with people. So you get references like you get it in Huckleberry Finn, you get it in The Lion King, you get it in all these resources. I mean, how does it show up even today? I'm sure it's showed up in Marvel movies, right? With some
Thor.
of the Thor for sure.
Probably making
Sure,
fun
yeah.
of Thor.
So
Doth mother know thou wearest her drapes? That's probably a line from Hamlet, I think.
yeah. And so this has had extraordinary cultural significance. Yes. That came directly from Hamlet.
Thought so.
He does hide in the curtains.
Yeah.
So someone could say
Arguably,
that.
without Hamlet, we would not have had that moment.
Yeah. So anyways, and this play kind of does mark the height of Shakespeare's art. It comes right around most scholars think it was written in 1599, 1600s. And so this would be the high point. So when he was writing this, let's see, he would also have been writing. Let me pull up a list of his works here. Chronology of Shakespeare's works. I had it up here. The Byzantine Empire. Wow. That's not him. So this would have been when he was also writing. Are you guys still there?
Mm-hmm.
Things like Henry V,
Yep.
Julius Caesar, Henry IV. A little bit after this would be King Lear and The Tempest, and those are like the final achievements of his craft. But this is like, if you were thinking of this in terms of Tolstoy, this is when he wrote his War and Peace. King Lear would be his Anna Karenina. I know you both really loved.
Strike that, reverse it.
Yep.
I know you both really loved King Lear. Well, chronologically, that's the way it would work, because Anna Karenina is after War and Peace.
Chronologically, my name is Brandon.
Well, that's what I do. I provide chronology. It's the one thing I give to this podcast, Nathan.
Chronology?
And then you get it wrong. 1 star.
Right.
I know.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. What can I do? Anyways, this guy was born in 1564. You happy?
Was he?
I got
You
that
sure
right.
It's not 1546.
I think you guys, I don't know. Why don't you spot check my facts as I go, and we can correct them if I get it wrong.
All right, I'll spot check your facts and correct you if you get it wrong. Wasn't it a Shakespeare episode that you made your infamous error?
It was,
on?
Yeah.
Where you said Queen Elizabeth died or was born or something, and something
I said her death date wrong.
You just inverted like 36 to 63 or 63 to 36 or something like that.
I said 1613 and she died in 1603. I think that's
Right.
what I said.
Pulling the facts out of thin air.
But this play would have been written right at the end of her, towards the end of her reign. In fact, I read an interesting thing. This is not about Hamlet, but apparently she had an assassination attempt on her in the same year that Julius Caesar came out.
Mm.
And a lot of people think that Shakespeare was kind of playing off the publicity of that.
Interesting.
And so a lot of the resources I use come from Stephen Greenblatt, who if you go back to our criticism episode, he's a new historicist. I think he still teaches at Harvard, but one of the preeminent Shakespeare scholars for a long time. And what I do like about new historicism is that it tries to contextualize the meaning of a work of art within the culture that it came out of. There's a lot of Marxist and not neoliberal, good grief, that's the wrong politics, just liberal, progressive agendas that come out of that. But in spirit, there's a lot to agree with. I mean, even C.S. Lewis technically was a new historicist, because in the opening to one of his works, he says that the only way you can really read the Aeneid is to understand what it would have been like to be Virgil, what it was to have been a Roman. And that's what we love about his essay on the epic, right? Is it really tries to do that. Contextualize for us what it would have been, what it actually means to read Beowulf, what it actually means to read the Iliad and the Odyssey. Man, that was a digression.
That was a great digression.
Because it brings us back to Shakespeare and understanding his time, who he was. And in 1564, this would have been in roughly the middle of Queen Elizabeth's reign. So he was an Elizabethan. Not till his death. He actually outlived her by 13 years. He died in 1616. He was both born and died on April 23rd, most people think. And so it's fun to celebrate his to be or not to be day on April 23rd. If there are any teachers out there with students and like to do that sort of thing.
That was the day when he was not?
Yeah, it's the day he was both, April 23rd. He was both born and died on April 23rd.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
So it's fun. His dad was a fairly prominent figure in the town he grew up in, Avon upon Stratford, or Stratford upon Avon.
1 star, incorrect.
1 star.
The immortal bard of Avon.
I'm just seeing if you guys are awake.
Yeah. Well, you're quietest make with a bear bodkin.
I'm getting the bear bodkin out, guys. Goodbye.
I've transferred my fartles to you.
Yep. Alas, poor Brandon. We knew him well.
Nothing better than fartles that have been used. What was I saying? Oh,
so he was in your fartles. You don't want fresh fartles.
He grew up in Stratford upon Avon, and he would have went to a day school where he would have learned Latin and basic arithmetic and things like that. But he would have also been introduced to some of the Latin histories, some of the British histories. For example, Plutarch, his lives. A lot of scholars think that he drew things from Plutarch's lives. Another thing, since he was in Stratford upon Avon, that he would have seen would have been some of the traveling plays that would have gone from town to town, some of the mystery shows and things such as that. But as we've discussed many times, we don't know a whole lot about Shakespeare. We have his will. I actually found something in this one book that people say they think is his handwriting, which is really fascinating because you can actually see him crossing things out in this text if it really is his handwriting, which goes to prove that he was the type of guy who edited and improved what he wrote.
I refuse to believe it. I believe that he only ever spat out perfect genius.
Yeah, and I mean it wasn't even him, it was Francis Bacon. So
that's right. Poor
Bacon.
uneducated idiot.
That's just because conservative scholars who don't believe that Shakespeare wrote his plays can only think about Bacon. And so that's the only alternative they can offer. If it's not Shakespeare, then it's who? Bacon. Bacon's good. He must have wrote real good too.
Yep. Hey, there's my rub.
Yeah.
They say to themselves.
That is what they say. So we know, well, he got married young at 18 to a woman 8 years older than he was, Anne Hathaway, not the actress.
Okay, yeah.
She's not.
So disappointing. I always think that every time you say that, like, well, Anne Hathaway, he scored big there, right?
Yeah.
She was his patroness, gave all the acting money to support his humble writing craft.
And one of our favorite facts is that when he died, his will left his second best bed to his wife. Mm-hmm. And some people see that as an attack on her.
But those people are...
Because the second best bed was usually the marital bed, because the best bed was always reserved for guests. So it was even in death, the old bard of the love sonnets.
The old bard of the love sonnets.
As he's known.
Yeah.
1 star.
Yep. Brendan's a regular bard of context today.
Well, he was... Thanks, Nathan. You want me to stop?
No, Brandon, I love you. You're the bard of love sonnets.
Anyways, and guess what happened in that marital bed?
Sex.
I got ideas.
They made 2 children, at least, Hamlet and Judith.
Hamlet?
And I wanted to mention that because, isn't that fun? His name was Hamnet. Like Hamlet, without the L and an N instead. Hamnet.
No, that would be like if Harrison Ford had a kid named Blindiana Jones.
I know. Maybe it was the pig's version of internet, Hamnet.
Yeah.
Precursor to ham radio.
Yep. Yeah, Hamnet.
Yeah, Hamnet. Everyone knows ham internet came way before ham radio.
Well, it's what was right in between the internet and ham radio. It's Hamnet. Yeah.
I'm glad we have this sort of gold stuff to fill in the cracks here. This is
that's what we do.
It's just not a whole lot to talk about with Shakespeare, guys.
It's a plaster podcast with gold in the cracks.
Shortly after this, we know that he did move to London and started a fairly successful career as an actor and also a playwright. There's a reference to him and another playwright. I think he was one of the university wits at the time. They were just a group of jerks who went around making fun of everybody. But one of them calls him the upstart crow. Most scholars think it was because this guy was jealous. Because here you have this young kid coming to London and making a splash with this stuff that was fairly popular. And to kind of understand why that was possible, we take a quick pause and just talk about the culture that surrounded him at the time. Elizabeth succeeded her father, Henry VIII, who had succeeded his father, Henry VII, who had left a great amount of wealth to what was known as the Tudor dynasty. And under Elizabeth, she took the success of her father, Henry VIII. He had split with the Catholic Church, and he had brought some success and wealth to England. But under her, there was the defeat of the Spanish Armada, and there was kind of the establishment of England as an up-and-coming superpower in Europe. And so because of that, and because of the rising naval prowess of England, and because of all these other factors, industry, the printing press, and other innovations that were happening, somewhat because this was just right after the Renaissance and this rebirth of knowledge and this desire to go out and understand the world through science, all these things that were happening just provided this perfect context for there to be a wealth, literal wealth, wealth pouring into England. And this meant that cities like London that in the 1300s and 1400s were a hellscape. I mean, if you ever read anything about the bubonic plague, the one place you didn't want to be was in a city, right? That was like a death sentence at the time. But suddenly cities could start having sanitation measures, and they could have all these other things to improve life. You had merchants that were also bringing in more wealth as the world expanded with the voyages to the new worlds. And it was just a really exciting time to be alive. And because of this, London became fairly wealthy. And that meant a lot of people had free time on their hands. And also because of stuff that had happened with the Reformation and things like that, there was more of a libertine take on life. Like art up and through the Middle Ages was usually always having to do with the church. Like even the Canterbury Tales, right, was about something that was dealing with the church, even though it was bawdy and had some innuendo in it. I was about to say Randy humor.
Randy humor actually.
We all know Randy.
Yeah, it does get a little randy, but doesn't a chicken end up somewhere that it shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen in that book. It's pretty awful stuff.
It's not really an innuendo when a chicken ends up somewhere.
That's true. It's Randy humor, I think, is more appropriate.
It's more Randy humor, yeah.
So there we go. Stuff like that. And there were things like that happening in the Middle Ages. It wasn't just this time of Gregorian chants and everybody sitting around dying of the bubonic plague. They were still people with their with their lusts and their body humor and stuff like that. I mean, I think sometimes that's what people think.
That's what I like. I like the depictions of the Middle Ages. Everybody sitting around doing Gregorian chant and dying.
Dying?
Yeah.
I'm not dead yet.
Yeah.
Hey, and smacking their faces with boards.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
One of my favorite facts that I like about London at the time of Shakespeare is its population, because we think of the old world and old world cities in modern terms. And do you guys know? Do you have a guess? Do you remember what the population of London was? London was, I think, at the time of Shakespeare, maybe the biggest city in the world.
Yeah.
But do you have a guess for what that meant, population-wise?
We talking
10,000.
It's quite a bit more than that.
Under 100,000?
It's 200,000.
Wow.
200,000. But, so to compare that, if you took the metro population of Evansville, Indiana, we're 1.5 times that.
Yeah, it's crazy. But that was, and it would be shortly after this that you would begin to have these population booms. And I do think that the population did kind of increase pretty significantly, right? Started to.
Indy's like 6 or 7 times. Right. Indianapolis, Indiana, 6 or 7 times the size of London. But yeah, I think that's even important when we're talking and thinking about the context for some of the great art that's been developed. People always think of art in terms of cities and city centers being the places where they develop. But in a city of 200,000 people, it's still possible to feel like everybody knows everybody. That's how Evansville feels at 365,000 people.
Right. Yeah.
It's not hard to have a lot of connections and a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of different people. So you have sort of like the benefit of tons of people to draw off of and feed off of, but you have kind of a smaller market. I think it's easier to thrive in a situation like that than.
And you're not just an anonymous peon in a group of anonymous peons just blending into the scenery. You have relationships and things like being cross-hatched between different groups and different people.
And we know that Shakespeare took advantage of that because around the same time he began to get some success, and it was actually right before Hamlet came out that he started with 10 other people, or 9 other people. He owned 1/10 of it, the Globe Theater. And he owned part of it. I think Hemmings, who would eventually, with Hemmings and the other guy, do the folio edition in 1623 that we now have of like is the definitive Shakespeare. But yeah, and the word of mouth would spread in London that there was this new awesome playhouse across the Thames, and everybody would go, and it was a good time at the theater. And a large part of that was because people now had the capital. They had spending money. They could go off and have a day at the theater. and enjoy themselves, because the Globe Theatre, a couple things about it. They built it across the Thames in the swamplands so that they could avoid some of the censorship laws in London, similar to like Las Vegas with its gambling, or like here in Indiana with gambling on the river. It's a way to avoid the censorship. And, theater, even at the time, like it had a little bit of the air of the transgressive about it. And so I think that there was probably also just the element that if it was on the other side of the river and you had to go over there to the seedy part of town, that it would still attract, like bars are usually very mindful about where they open up for the same reason. But either way, they were over there and they began to become very successful. They did have competitors. I was reading about some of those a couple days ago, and one of their competitors decided to just close up shop and basically take their troupe back across the river into London because Shakespeare's troupe was getting so much popularity and demand. Another interesting thing is apparently their biggest competitors were groups of young boys who were known as being very witty and also good actors that would start some acting troupes. And there are some lines in Hamlet that refer to this phenomenon. Actually, I think I've got it right here.
Oh, I remember when the troupe comes in and he's...
Yeah, the troupe comes in and Rosencrantz says, he explains, "There is, sir, an eyrie of children, little eyases, which means young hawks. These are now the fashion." So that's actually a direct reference to the same phenomenon that was happening during Shakespeare's time. But yeah, so it was in this environment. People come into the playhouse. I think the biggest example, the closest example we have nowadays would probably be, and I'm sure certain people would probably hate this comparison, but would be Hamilton, then the success of Hamilton.
Yep.
It was a big production. And they would, depending on they would take their show occasionally on the road, and they would go travel to the houses of nobles, like to their manor houses, and put on huge productions. And there was this one famous set designer who would go and he would make really elaborate sets for them. And so it could be like a pretty awesome show that they would put on. In fact, in this one book, Will in the World, if anybody's really interested in kind of diving into a brilliant narrative of what it would have been like to have lived during Shakespeare's time, it's really wonderful. It's by Stephen Greenblatt. It's called Will in the World. And it gives a story about what it would have been like to have been at one of those shows, at one of these noblemen's houses. But the Globe Theatre was different. It was designed in such a way as the nobles could sit up on top, and then the theater stage itself protruded out into the area where the audience would stand. And, they would be standing there and they would be drinking their beer, and they would just be having sometimes a very raucous time while they were in the middle of these productions. Even in a tragedy, there would often be breaks between acts for some of the men to come out and drag and do some dances. And so it was just it was not this sort of, I think that a lot of people, when they think of Shakespeare, they think of going to the symphony, right? Americans have mastered let's make it seem like a rich, suited event. Mm-hmm. And that's not really what it was like at the time to go to the Globe Theatre. Now, maybe at a nobleman's house, yes, it would have been that way. But in the Globe Theatre, no, that's not what it would have been like really at all. It was a day at the theater, and people were there to have a good time. In fact, one of the few writings we have about someone who actually saw a Shakespeare play said he went to see Julius Caesar, and there were some lovely dances at the end by the actors. And so it wasn't just the play. They also had these intermissions and these other things that were happening as well. Hamlet itself was written, like I said, in 1599 or 1600. We have it today in three versions. There's a 1603 version, there's a 1604 version, and then there's the 1623 kind of definitive version that Hemmings and Condell put out. And they were friends of Shakespeare. And at the time, what would happen is occasionally a publisher would get their hands on a script, and they would publish it in what was either a quarto or a folio version, depending. So quartos were smaller than the folios. And they would sell these because the printing press had just, about a century earlier, revolutionized the capabilities. You guys hear that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyways, the printing presses had revolutionized the ability for these things to go out to the public. And so you would sometimes have authorized versions. Even more often, you would have people who would go and listen to a play, and they would be paid to go and try to, from memory, write down the play as they had heard it. And so one of the challenges of scholars is finding which of these things is the accurate copy,
And how would you begin to approach that task?
They have their ways. They compare manuscripts. So like the three that they kind of know are the versions of Hamlet that we can use today are the 1603, the 1604, which were authorized, or at least they were trustworthy sources. And the 1623, that's Hemmings and Condell, and we know that that's pretty reliable. But even then, those three sources have pretty significant textual differences from one another. And so it matters even when you're looking at what play you're reading. And for those who really want a deep dive into this, you can buy the Arden Hamlet, which gives you all three together. There's a little plug for the Arden.
If you want to read like half a line of the text,
and then a whole page
and then have
of notes.
a whole page and a half of notes.
Who wouldn't want to read that?
and then there's like a page, couple pages of notes, or not. And then that's barely.
It's about like
Why does that not sound enjoyable?
Well, if you like Shakespeare, then it's not that enjoyable to just read a bunch of notes. But
in my opinion, you should have multiple sources. I have my Oxford edition of Shakespeare that I actually read when I want to read.
Mm-hmm.
But when I want to do research, I use my Arden.
Yep. Well, anytime that I'm
so if you like research, then fine.
Yeah.
But
if you feel like you're ever going to be in the position where, the Arden's pretty cool. But if you're
into research.
So anytime I want to watch a movie, I want to have a couple TVs, and I want one TV to be playing the documentary about how they made the movie, and then I want the movie, the commentary playing.
Well, you don't do it. You don't read.
And then I want the actors, talking about different scenes, sort of like synced up.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, my wife to read the back of the Blu-ray as I watch the movie. I find it really.
And then I want Roger Ebert or somebody like that going along and providing critical analysis.
Right. It's the only way to watch a movie.
Only way.
Oh boy. There's a time to do research, and then there's a time to enjoy the play. You don't do it at the same time. We've talked about all these editions in the past, and I think if you enjoy the research, I highly recommend Arden, but for most people, I don't think you should buy the Arden.
There's more to Shakespeare than is contained in your philosophies, Brandon.
Yeah. But for anyone who wants to be as awesome as me, go and buy yourself an Arden Shakespeare.
Now, I'll agree with that. Anyone who wants to be as awesome as Brandon can buy themselves an Arden Shakespeare.
And you will be as awesome as Brandon.
Yeah.
To be. It is a question.
There is only one Brandon Chastain.
Were you just doing a Highlander?
Yeah.
One of Shakespeare's great late masterpieces.
So anyways, Hamlet. We know that it was first performed in about 1599, 1600, like I said.
Blah, 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 blah. This is like the Arden Brandon's.
Well, do you just want to read the play out loud then? What do you want?
I'm just providing notes here. I'll tell people, you just give the context. I'll describe the shirt that you're wearing and give people broader context about your context. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3.
No.
Nathan, you describe Brandon currently, and I'll start talking about Brandon's history and past.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Oh, wow.
That'll really add to the context.
Yeah.
Because people need the context for the context.
Right.
And the context for the context, that's context.
I think I'm getting off. I'm going to bed.
Brandon, the Arden edition's great. It's good. I'm glad you like to research stuff and read notes.
Hey, we wouldn't have this episode.
No,
we wouldn't have this show without Arden and without your.
But guess what, guys?
Research.
I am to the point now where I don't recommend that everybody buy an Arden Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's a productive book for everybody to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should get the Penguin editions. Those are really great. If you're looking for a single volume, the Pelican, I think, is what their imprint. Those are really nice little versions, and they have just enough notes to help you understand some of the words like bodkin and farter or whatever it is. So when Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, he was actually drawing from a prior history of other Hamlet plays. In fact, there's an interesting thing I read where probably in the 1580s, which would have been about a decade before he wrote his Hamlet, there was a version by Thomas Kidd and some of those university wits, the same guys who called Shakespeare an upstart crow, made fun of these Hamlet narratives. It kind of became synonymous with, what would be a movie series today that would be synonymous with overblown melodrama and kind of just silly schlock.
Lifetime?
Yeah, stuff like that. And so the Hamlet story was kind of known for that, just kind of being overblown and melodramatic. And so what most scholars think is that around 1599, probably one of, the Globe was doing really well, and one of his acting troupe partners came and said, "Hey, Shakespeare, time is right. Let's do like the art house version of Hamlet, right? Let's actually do it, and let's make it work this time." And so they did. He wrote Hamlet, and it was innovative in the sense that it was able to, with Hamlet, and we'll talk a lot about this. We're not going to do it on context, but with Hamlet, he was able to master this craft that he would also continue with King Lear and The Tempest, where it's all about, through monologue and dialogue, revealing the inner thoughts and kind of a very deeply psychoanalytical, in a way that his earlier plays weren't as much. And so this is kind of the revolutionary period in Shakespeare's art. A lot of scholars see this as a turning point to where it would lead into his great final works, marked by Hamlet, King Lear, and The Tempest. Those are usually seen as his three masterpieces. So, and which we've done every one of those except The Tempest now, right? Have we done The Tempest?
No.
No, that's still ahead of us.
That's going to be a tempestuous year.
Golden ticket to quality infotainment.
Thank you, Nathan. One fun fact that I heard from someone is that tragedies at the time, so we have Hamlet, we have Othello, there was a tradition at the time of naming the tragedies after the tragic hero, and comedies would usually get a broader title, such as
Merry Wives of Windsor.
Yep. And that was not just Shakespeare. That was actually kind of the standard way of titling things at the time. And maybe about 1/6 of the plays from the period actually still exist because all the others were lost because no one cared to go in and memorize the whole thing and go and write it down. Or another interesting fact too. Do you guys know where the term role comes from? Like an actor's role, like how we got that idea or term? So we've talked about kind of the history of printing and how it affected the Shakespeare that we have now. And so even though we had the printing press, it was still pretty expensive to publish a folio. Like just, a half a century earlier with Henry VIII, when he broke from the church in England, they were able to print Bibles, and it was kind of revolutionary for Henry VIII to do this and put them in the churches so people could go and read them in English. But they still had to chain them down to the lecterns because they were expensive to produce, right? And so it was still a developing technology. And so they could produce these folios in quartos, but they were still kind of expensive. And so the way that the playhouses could get around this was they would take the actors' exit and entrance cues and all their lines, and they would glue them together and then roll them up and give them to each actor. And that was their role.
Huh.
Isn't that really interesting?
That is interesting.
And so another reason they would have wanted to do this, of course, was the intellectual property. They didn't want it's kind of like, with even Marvel does this, right? Like only Thor actor, he only gets his part. He doesn't get to see everybody else's lines and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't want the people to be able to take it and run to the nearest publisher and print Shakespeare's new play, right? Even though they knew inevitably, because they didn't have that sort of intellectual property law at the time, somebody was going to go in and steal it just by memorizing it and going out and doing it that way. But yeah, and so that's kind of the surroundings to how Hamlet came into existence. There was a long line of Hamlets before it, and this was kind of the crowning achievement of the Hamlets. It kind of marked a change and a high point in Shakespeare's craft as a writer. So it'll be interesting. So these will be some talking points as we move into the play, because we've read several of his works now. Mm-hmm. Like, how is this different than some of the other stuff we've looked at? How is it similar to King Lear? It does have a lot of similarities to King Lear. And then also just the cultural surroundings behind the play that brought into an existence. So that's really all I've got for Hamlet. We've talked about the fact that this has had a long life after the play, and that there have been many, 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 many retellings. And it is so deeply woven into our artistic psyche as a culture that pretty much everything in some way is a reference to Hamlet, I'm sure. And so that alone makes this this is his crowning achievement as far as the lines that we can quote from it, the importance of the story, all these things. Even if it's not your favorite Shakespeare play, I don't really think you can argue against it being the most important of the Shakespeare plays. So, in our usual context, there are a couple other things we usually touch on, like the fact that we think that Shakespeare actually did exist. We do.
Do we have to trust on that? Yeah.
And wrote everything that's generally credited to him.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple examples of where he co-wrote things with other playwrights, but generally speaking, he wrote what we think he wrote. And there are a lot of really smart people out there who believe that Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare, and they spend their whole life studying him. And, yes, they are mostly liberals and progressives, but...
No, unfortunately, the elitist conservatives, our very own group, decided that Shakespeare couldn't be Shakespeare because he was a man of the people, so...
Which is a really weird way for them to have gone.
Yeah, I can't stand it. It's embarrassing to be associated with it, quite frankly.
So, the simplest argument in my book is the fact that so many of the great writers of the past pretty much came from nothing, and they just had that genius ability to observe the world around them and an incredible gift for language. You mix those two together, and you get a Shakespeare or a Tolstoy or someone like that, or a Charles Dickens.
I hate all that stuff. All those kinds of textual arguments where they're like, the style's different in this work than the other work. It's like, dude, have you ever looked at your emails from 5 years ago? Like,
yeah.
What'd you say?
That's the argument I hate the most too. And it is that. It's like, go back and read something you wrote 5-10 years ago.
Read texts that you sent a year ago. I mean, honestly.
Or open your text right now and look at the difference between the text that you send to your pastor versus the text that you send to your wife versus the text that you send to your boys. Like,
yeah,
they sound very different, and there's a reason for that. And for somebody who's a master of creating characters and inhabiting them, to pretend like that guy can't write a play in a different tone and style or try to do something that feels completely different. I mean, come on, the opposite would be true.
Yeah.
Anybody creative enough to write Hamlet is going to be not trying to reproduce Hamlet for the rest of his life. It's going to be, what else can I do? What's different? How do I break this? How do I bend this? How do I do something new or cool? Like, this is the way it goes with anybody with that kind of creativity. And part of why I think it's really stupid that conservatives and conservative Christians get on this rant is because it's the same arguments that are used against the authorship of the Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't know. Let's think about it. Will the Apostle Paul write the same way he did, at the beginning of his ministry or 10 years later? Would he write to Timothy, his true son in the faith, differently than he would write to the Corinthian church? I mean, come on.
No, he only had one style that he could possibly use, and if he deviates from that at all, it must be because somebody else wrote it.
Yep.
Ignorant and arrogant. The amount of hubris it takes to go against thousands of years, or in the case of Shakespeare, hundreds of years of history and tradition and common sense.
Yeah,
because you think that you've got a special angle on something.
It is so snobby, and the whole mid-century snotty, William Buckley crowd. They are just a bunch of elitist snobs.
Well, you know who wasn't an elitist snob, and this is the last thing we generally touch on with Shakespeare? Was Shakespeare.
Bill.
Bill. Old Bill. Bill the
It's just always nice every time we approach Shakespeare to remember that we as Americans have inherited this romantic, meaning the 1800s idea of what genius is, that it's some sort of, and granted, the Greeks and all those people had this idea of the muses and this gifting that people would have, a talent, but it was still different than this priest-like, godlike sense of genius that we have inherited, to where the artist has some significant purpose that they've been given in this world, and this burden that they carry, and there's just all this weight and responsibility we put on artists that is it's what, oh man, the gay, Leaves of Grass. My brain is really tired.
Walt Whitman.
Thank you. Kept wanting to say Longfellow, but that's not right. Opposite extremes. Mm-hmm. Walt Whitman, thank you. I could remember the name of his work, but not his name. That is really strange.
1 star.
Yeah.
These guys don't even know who Walt Whitman is.
Yeah. He said that poets were the new priests of the world. And we now have this, both with our celebrity culture and just also we're always looking for people to make the world mean something to us. And so we've now given that burden to our artists, right? And it's just not the way it was in the Elizabethan age. Poets and playwrights would have been seen as just a member of one of the crafts, one of the guilds, and what they would have been similar to would have been any other craftsman. And they were just out there to do their job. And the job here was to entertain all those people at the Globe in the best way possible. I like Greenblatt's theory that Shakespeare was, felt this challenge to take a schlocky story and make it really work and knock it out, and he knocked it out of the park, And so there was the other challenge, could I craft something beautiful out of this melodramatic pile of rubbish that other people had struggled with? But there is still that element of craftsmanship. And one of the arguments for this is we do have some of the folios where there are lines and stuff crossed out, and there are changes from folio to folio. And it's probably not all just because somebody misheard a line and then went out and tried to write it down. It's probably because Shakespeare actually was experimenting and changing his lines from performance to performance, because he was always trying to perfect and make it better, because he wasn't precious about his work, and he approached it like the craft that it was, and not some oracle of genius that could never change.
And if you've seen, we do a movies podcast, Sanity at the Movies. There's no movie where the actors don't end up shaping and reshaping lines. Mm-hmm. And directors and writers work with the actors, and the actor will have, he's in character, and you have a bunch of people that you're trying to track as a writer and as a director, but the actor may have a special line on what his character might actually do or think or feel or say, or what would feel natural to him to pull off as an actor. Mm-hmm. That kind of thing happens all the time. And somebody like Shakespeare is I keep hearing my voice. Like,
I hear it, your voice.
Double.
I also hear your voice.
Oh.
It's like on a phone call. Shakespeare, I think, being an artist and an actor's writer, would be sensitive to that sort of thing and tweaking things based on the acting troupe that he had at any given time, as much as anything. Things evolve.
Yeah, and we see that we see that here with Hamlet, with the 1603, 1604, the changes that are between the sources. And I guess the lesson that you can take from that, the lesson we take from that is that, one, it's really dangerous to have that cult of genius. And we see that in the way that even today we think of Shakespeare as this perfect artifact from the past. And I think that we lose the fact that it was made by a man. And there can be really obvious things in these plays that make it very clear it was written by a living, breathing human being. I mean, you read Romeo and Juliet, and the first scene is just full of pretty risque humor, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, this was not a perfect individual, but he wrote some of the greatest stories that we have today. And there just really is a danger in, I think, approaching anything outside of Scripture as though it's perfect and God-breathed and inspired from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And that is the way a lot of people approach things like this.
I think the other thing you have to understand that's implicit in what you guys have been saying is there was an audience and they would laugh at one thing and not laugh at another and respond to something. And like, this has been honed and things have been cut. And this is like what survived because people liked it. So that Romeo and Juliet scene, like, that's what the people thought was funny.
Right.
Yeah.
For better or worse, all those lines got laughs. That's why they're there. I don't know how Shakespeare ultimately felt about those lines. I do know that they worked on stage.
Yeah.
Yep. So any comedian who goes on a comedy club tour is going to always be tweaking and writing and rewriting his material based on the responses that he gets.
Right. And unless you're Andy Kaufman or Norm Macdonald or some crazy person, you don't keep things in that don't get a response. Most people aren't performance artists. Certainly Shakespeare was not a performance artist who was in it to just make some kind of artistic statement. You leave things in because they make people cry, because they make people laugh, because they get the intended response. And so everything in a play like Hamlet has been honed in order to move you to have a reaction. And if it
occasionally occasionally there's something in there that gets an unintended response, and then you make a decision to lean into that or lean away from it.
I mean, I think you see that kind of thing happen in Shakespeare all the time, actually, especially with the humor, which to our modern sensibilities can seem very out of place. But you just have to imagine, like, well, this was played by an actor that people responded to and they were laughing. So let's keep it going. Let's add another line in. Let's do another one.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But yeah, and going off what you said, these were plays that were meant to be enjoyed. And I think one of the best ways to experience a Shakespeare play is to watch it.
Amen.
They weren't meant to be... Shakespeare wasn't thinking about his work surviving. In his sonnets, there are signs that he was thinking about those potentially surviving, but not as, these were plays. He wasn't... The printing press even wasn't at the point where he was imagining that this would last for forever. And so these were meant to be performed. They were meant to be watched and enjoyed. And that's the best way to see a Shakespeare, is the way he intended it. So,
yeah, I mean, there are things that barely work without it. I mean, reading Hamlet, you're just going to get, they fight, exit. And well, that doesn't really feel very dramatic.
Yeah. And
after all this build up.
Yeah. And even, with Hamlet's his longest play, but it's still great. So,
yeah, it's a lot of fun. Well, we'll talk about the versions that we've watched in preparation for this and who we think is the best Hamlet and all that kind of stuff. And we'll examine the play in greater detail. But speaking of details, we have got to remember the great detail of shouting out all our patrons, the people who make this show possible. They go to patreon.com/the Bookening. They give a small amount every month, and it enables us to do this show. And for the right amount, $10 a month, you can be part of the Donor Shout Out Club. And what happens is I say your name, and then Jake and or Brandon says a drink from Starbucks that they think you most resemble. And so we'll start it out with Robert and Rhonda the Lovebirds.
Well,
coffee.
Yeah. I was going to say caramel macchiato, because that's what my mom always gets.
You would know.
Yeah, that's true. You would know. All right, Jake. Who do you think the artful Anthony Dodger resembles?
I think he resembles himself.
I mean, what coffee do you... I'm sorry, I misphrased the question.
Coffee.
No Shakespeare in my coffee. Yeah, that's true. The immortal Chelsea E.
With just a little bit of scotch in it. Cafe Americano.
Yeah. Little Anthony's Cigar Store.
Coffee.
Jimmy Beam and Little Annie Oakley.
Blonde roast.
Lily of the Valley.
Coffee.
Andrew Nest of the Lovebirds.
Featured Starbucks dark roast coffee.
Ooh, the featured Starbucks dark roast coffee. The Keith Master.
Coffee.
David Madman Trucking.
Cappuccino.
John Julia B. Max.
Coffee.
Jane Katie or Gold Love Cheese. And also C.S. Lewis. Couldn't tell we have faces.
Flat white.
Flat white.
Paint. You got some paint colors in there?
Says here it's a smooth ristretto. Shots of espresso get the perfect amount of steam
never
full
heard of
milk
that.
to create a not too long, not too creamy, just right flavor.
What you need to do at Starbucks is get a pour over a clover if they have it, so that you don't get something that's burnt.
Yeah, or just go support your local coffee shop, folks. I don't mean to be that guy, but why go to Starbucks? Fair Princess of Wonder and Happiness, Mother Beth.
Coffee.
God's over, I'm Adam.
Pistachio latte.
Nathan, not me.
Nathan.
Ryan, Loretta Avenger, and Judith of the Ladies of Justice.
Cinnamon dolce latte.
DJ Sammy G.
Coffee.
Benny and Dana Tiberius.
Peppermint white chocolate mocha.
Eric and Catherine from Yon Window Breaks.
Coffee.
Professor and Lady.
What in the world are you doing?
Eggnog latte. Let's. I'm putting the 2 times speed on this, Nathan.
The fair and
2 times.
fragrant. Like 2 times slower?
2 times faster.
Chloe. All right. That would make me back up to normal. Lavender's green Dylan.
Coffee.
Caramel brulee
Constrictor,
latte, eggnog
Marichi.
latte, chestnut praline latte, honey oatmeal latte. Keep
You're
going.
right.
Golden
He's
Haze,
saying
Life,
them.
Liberty, The Pursuit of Cheese, Jujitsu, Jeffrey,
Coffee.
the Texas Ranger,
Coffee.
Midnight Ninja Ellen,
Toasted
Citizen
white
Jedi,
chocolate
JF
mocha.
Dragon Room,
Coffee.
Timothy the Writer,
Starbucks
Eric and
dark
Kate the Game,
Coffee.
Warm and Love Bees, Maddie,
Maddie.
Coffee.
Sweet Jamie Sunshine, Tyler the Keeper.
I'm going to now read the star ratings of all the local
Oh, by the way,
Starbucks.
guys, you will never believe what book Tyler the Keeper of Eternal Darkness has decided that we are going to be reading next year. I'll tell you off mic because we're not ready to announce it yet, but I'm just going to say it's going to be something.
Yeah.
Okay. Where were we? Cold
Ready
Steel
Player
Cody,
2.
Jacqueline the
Coffee.
Librarian Barbarian, John Bombadil
Coffee.
Bomb Diggity, and Captain Tennille,
Coffee.
his mate.
Coffee.
Saxophone Alex.
Coffee.
The other Saxophone Alex. And
That's what you're getting at.
Danny.
It's coffee.
Dracula.
The Terror of Texas and Jericho of the Cream and Crimson, who no
Frankenstein.
longer
Frankenstein.
stuck in the
Frankenstein.
mold.
Frankenstein.
Please,
Frankenstein.
and cheese.
Frankenstein.
No.
Dracula drinking coffee.
Frankenstein. Frankenstein.
Dracula
Frankenstein.
likes
Frankenstein.
eggnog
Frankenstein.
latte.
Frankenstein.
Dracula likes
Frankenstein.
hot chocolate
Frankenstein.
mocha.
Frankenstein.
Dracula
Frankenstein.
likes
Flair.
cafe
And
mocha.
yeah, okay.
Frankenstein.
Get your gun. Fly to the
Frankenstein.
Valerie.
Frankenstein.
Thor
Frankenstein.
Ragnarok.
Dracula.
Steven.
Frankenstein.
Peppermint mocha.
Frankenstein.
Pegalon. Christopher the Flower Wolf. Lady of the Crystal Lake.
Coffee.
Ian the Dathomirian, Lord of Death.
Starbucks.
A man in possession
Reserve.
of an Emily is
Hazelnut.
nothing.
Bianco.
Coffee.
Emily
Latte.
Nightshade. The Haunter
Coffee.
of Dreams.
Toasted.
All about the Benjamin.
Coffee.
Mysterious Phantom.
White
Coffee.
chocolate mocha.
And finally, of course, Jeremy the Dark-Hooded Lord of Death and his brooding pride.
Public service announcement. Cornwall is a county, not a city.
Oh, yeah, that was a 1-star moment. Whose fault was that?
Probably mine. They're always mine.
I had a teacher named Mrs. Cornwall.
We've heard about her.
Yep. I called her Mrs. Cromwell. It was a very historically literate insult. And then she got Bethany Stentonbenz in trouble for some reason. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Goodbye. Good night, sweet princes and princesses.
Alas, to sleep no more.
My cat gets concerned when we yell for Maya. She
Aw.
always comes running.
Well, goodbye,
What-
cat.
What's the book? What's the book?
I'll tell you as soon as I stop recording.